Hi, everybody. Welcome to week 8 of our 10-part video series on marketing for small businesses in the food, wine, and beer industries. Today, we're going to talk about public relations with an expert in this subject, Paul Wagner. Now, Paul is really an expert in the wine industry, but that is going to be very applicable to anybody also in the beer and food industries. And although Paul also has a wide variety of skills, I think public relations is one of the things that is at his core competencies, you might say. I'd like to give you a little bit of a brief intro about Paul, but before I do, I just wanted to say that as a small business owner, I find public relations to be crucial. It can really launch companies, especially small new companies, and yet at the same time, it's sort of an enigma and very difficult to do and can be very time consuming. So it's a perfect subject for a video like this, because I think that we'll be able to give you some good hints in a short amount of time that you can use to actually increase the exposure of your business. So Paul is an instructor for Napa Valley College's Viticulture and Enology Department and for the Culinary Institute of America at Greystone. He's a guest lecturer at the Wind Tour MBA program in Europe and the OIV Wine Marketing program at UC Davis. He speaks at a lot of conferences, and that includes ours, which is how we know Paul. He's spoken with us multiple times. He co-wrote a couple of books previously, The Wine Marketing and Sales Strategies for a Saturated Market and Wine Sales and Distribution. He's a judge. He has been a judge at more than 100 international wine competitions. He's a founding member of the Academy of Wine Communications. He's a founder of Balzac Communications, where many in the wine industry best know him. So he's got a very long and storied career in this industry. His most recent book, and Paul, maybe you can show everybody, is The Artisan Public Relations, which is extremely applicable to this conversation. So Paul, did you time that perfectly, writing that book right now for us?
Well, I pretty much did, but you know, that book grew out of a series of columns I wrote for a trade magazine in the beverage industry. For 10 years, I was a columnist, and each week, or every 2 months, they asked me to write a column on an issue that was facing the industry. Well, over 10 years, I covered pretty much every aspect of public relations. So at that point, I then turned to the publisher and said, look, I think this is a book. And he said, go ahead. So I called a couple publishers, and one of them said, oh, absolutely. So wrote the book, and it's a pretty basic, very practical guide. And you raised a really good point in the introduction. When you weren't talking about me, you were talking about public relations. And that's the important thing, because you said it's crucial, and it's sometimes hard for startups to get their hands around it. But in fact, when you look at marketing in general, when you look at promoting your business and trying to get the word of your business out to the public, most other marketing activities cost a lot of money. As a small brewer, you don't have the money to buy ads during the Super Bowl, but you still need to get your name out. And it's true, you probably don't need a national vision, but you do need at least a way to reach that local audience. And that's public relations. Public relations is the one way you can do it without spending a ton of money. Now, to get started, there is one basic mistake that almost every company, particularly small companies, but companies in general, make in terms of their public relations, their marketing in general, which is they don't know what their message is. You know, the old rule in marketing is that you need to explain how you're better, how you're first. You need to explain what makes you different, or as my mother always used to say, what makes you think you're so special? Well, that's a problem for most small companies, whether it's a brewery, whether it's a winery, whether it's a cheese company. What makes you different? Well, we're small. So's everybody else. Well, we're family owned. So's everybody else. So first issue is, in most cases, small companies don't do a very good job of determining their key message. What makes them different? And any marketing campaign has 3 basic components: message, audience, and tactics. Public relations is tactics. The message is a market strategy question, and that's the place where a lot of people fall short. Now, we need to tell them we make really good beer. That's not a message because everybody says they make really good beer. You need to figure out what makes you different. So once you've done that, once you've established how it is that you are different, then you can go on and engage in the basic roles of communications, public relations. And I always have a cute exercise I play with my students. I start off by saying, first of all, who can give me a definition of public relations? Well, people say things. That's being nice to people. In fact, I think in the book I start by saying it used to be if you wanted to be good in public relations, you had to be cute, blonde, and young. And I'm not cute, and I'm not blonde, and I'm not young, and yet I'm pretty good at public relations. So that must not be the answer. What is the answer? And then when I draw my students out on it, eventually I give them my definition, which really makes them angry, but it makes the point, which is public relations is just relations with publics, with an S. And the next activity we do is we sit down and we make, as an exercise, a list of all the publics. Now, for a lot of people, the most important public is, I want to know the guy at the New York Times who writes about my product, because if I get a story in the New York Times, I'm done. I'm finished. I've hit a home run. Of course, you don't have a unique story, you don't have a unique message, and you don't have any way to reach that person, but what the heck. I define the messages a little differently, or the publics a little differently. I start out by saying, who is your target audience? Are New York Times readers necessarily your customers? I'd rather look at, for smaller companies, smaller geographic markets. So who lives within 100 miles of you? Who talks to those people? So when you start making this list, you begin with media, and that can be television, radio, print. It should also be social media. All of those are various publics. Then you add things like your neighbors. If you want to know who can make your life miserable as a producer of a small artisan project, neighbors are at the top of the list. Local regulatory agencies, all of those people are publics. And then once you've got your message, we are unique because of this. And then you've got your list of publics, from the media to consumers to members of your loyalty club to suppliers are a key audience. To me, the two most important audiences on the planet are your employees and your shareholders. You need a plan for each one of those to communicate your message to that audience. What's the most effective way of communicating that message to that particular audience? So message, then audiences, and then one by one, you start making these tactics to reach those individual audiences. Should make a lot of sense, and it's pretty simple. The challenge is most people want to start with, well, we need a website and a brochure. And they haven't defined who the audience is, and they haven't defined their message. And if you start making a website and you start making a brochure, my first question is, for example, what do you need a brochure for? Well, it's to hand out. Okay, who are you going to hand it to? Well, people who visit our tasting room, or people who see us. Okay, and what do you want them to do when they get the brochure? Well, remember us. Okay, I'm going to tell you a much better way to get them to remember you is to give them a bottle of beer or a bottle of wine, and have them buy that bottle and take it home and share it with friends. Much more effective than giving a free brochure. And in the trade, Allan, you know this, with trade shows, there is a term for all of this stuff that people give out, because they're called trash can brochures. Because if you want to get them all back, all you have to do is go out to the first trash can outside the door of the conference, because that's where all those brochures end up. You can go out and pick yours back out again and use them again at the next conference. So why do you need a brochure? That's the kind of question I'm always asking my clients. Why do you need this? Why do you need that? Instead of saying, okay, here's our message, here's our audience. What's the best way to get that message to that audience? That's public relations, pure and simple. And then it's just a question of executing. And I always use the image of the Chinese wall. You get up every morning and you spend half an hour doing this. And the first morning you go out into your garden and you put a rock in the ground, and your neighbors look at you and say, "Guy's crazy." And a week later, there are 7 rocks in the ground, and they say, I don't know, looks like he's building something. But 4 years later, you've suddenly built this absolutely gorgeous wall. It's brilliantly constructed, and everybody says he's a marketing genius. And he's not a marketing genius. He just did something every day to put a rock on the wall, and that's the way you need to approach public relations.
So that's an excellent summary, Paul. I have a few questions for you.
I was hoping you would.
In terms of the message, does it change all the time? Because at the very beginning, people want to come up with their grand message, right? Not we produce good beer, but we have this specialty, or we, produce it in this way, which makes us different from everybody else. You can't continue to send that same message to, for example, the media. They will get tired of you sending that same message. So are you defining that message then as something that changes, and when they create something new that's newsworthy, that's a new message they then send out?
Yeah, it's a great, and you've really asked 2 questions there. One of them is that initial message, because of course, for a lot of companies starting out, their big marketing messages were the new kid on the block. Oops, because 2 years from now, that is no marketing message whatsoever. That's bad strategy. So you're absolutely right. If we're unique in making beer this certain way, and that's what we want to become known for, then I would argue your message doesn't change. What you need to do is figure out clever ways to repeat that message over and over again. And remember that, for example, the media often write what are called roundup articles. Roundup articles are, Robert Mondavi and those wineries in the Napa Valley. Well, the goal in any marketing campaign is when somebody writes a roundup article, you want to be the Robert Mondavi. You don't want to be and those other wineries in the Napa Valley. So if you're making beer with hops imported from the Pilsen region of the Czech Republic, and you're the only guy in the state of Washington that's doing that, then ultimately you'd love to see a roundup story saying your brewery and other people who are using these rare imported hops. That's the goal. But the key message, that's why it's so important to get it right in the beginning. Because if you start by saying this is the way we make our beer, and then 2 years later you say, yeah, well, we've decided our message is something else entirely, then actually what you're doing is confusing people. I thought you were the guys, weren't you the guys who were using, yeah, we still use, why'd you stop talking about it?
Yeah.
One of the key rules in public relations is it takes 3 to 5 years for a message to get through to the final public. So one of my rules is about the time you are sick to death of talking about something, that's about the first time other people are actually hearing it and internalizing it and saying, yeah, that's probably true. And that's when you need to not stop and change messages. That's when you need to say, ha, we're finally getting through. Now we need to hammer it.
Well, so I've got another question then that also might have multiple parts for you. It involves then the audience, but also the tactics, your part 2 and 3. In terms of the audience then, as a small business owner, what we do is we create that database. A lot of it's just going out there and searching for those appropriate recipients of the message. And let's just say we're talking about media only. We create our database of media, and then we go out and oftentimes I'm personally emailing them, or we email them en masse to get them to pay attention to us, hopefully over time.
Right.
Is that, for small businesses, do you think that is the right way to do it, and even has advantages having that message coming from the owner versus the idea of potentially paying someone $10,000 a year to create that database for you and send out that message for you?
Yeah, it's a great question, and frankly, both ways work. I would say this, that when you think about media, the first person you should develop a relationship with is the person who is geographically closest to you in the news media. So for example, I am on a first name basis with 3 or 4 people who write for the Napa Valley Register, my local newspaper. Now, do they write about me every week? Good God, no. I think they've written about me maybe 3 times in 5 years. But there are 2 reasons I want to do this. One of them is by developing a relationship, they almost have to talk to me because part of their job is understanding the local market. And I am part of the local market. So they're paid to cover me in a way that some guy in New York isn't paid to cover me. So I have a little bit more leverage with the local person. Second thing is, if there's ever a story about me, where do those big international reporters go first to get the local lowdown on what's going on with your business? They go on the internet and they read what's been written about you in the local paper. Now, they get a pitch from you about how you're the most important thing on the West Coast, and you have superseded Gavin Newsom as the most newsworthy character on the West Coast. And then they go on the local Napa newspaper and say, he's a nice guy, teaches at the local JC. And they say, okay, so by talking to those local reporters, you're not only developing those relationships that will pay dividends long term, you're also building a database of stories on the internet that will ultimately support your claims, your positioning. And then the most important thing, when you talk to these people, ask them questions. So when I sit down with a journalist and I pitch them a story, one of the things I'm always doing is saying, here's the idea I have for you. Do you think this will work? And if they say no, I don't say, oh, I'm so sorry. I say,
why?
What could I do to make this story more attractive? And one of the examples is, they will say, I can't do a story about one company right now. I need to do a story of a trend in the industry. If you can find 4 other people who are doing this, then I can write the story. Perfect. That tells me exactly what I need to do to go get coverage.
Excellent. Well, Paul, do me a favor, hold that book up again. This is a book that is very exactly relevant to the topic at hand for the people listening to this. So if you're interested in more Artisan Public Relations, Paul, thank you very much. We appreciate your time this morning.
Better looking than me, isn't it? My pleasure, Allan. Always great to talk to you. And I will see you in Eugene in August.
Yes, exactly. Thank you.
My pleasure.